Thank you, Chair. Mr Colin John Blanche, the Deputy Commissioner of WA Police Force.
Excellent. Now, I understand over the years the THC content has increased over time. It's been bred a higher THC to get the illegal high. Where are we? What's the current state in Western Australia, please?
Look, I don't think the police are in a position to give you, I suppose, the medical science behind the increase in products over time. As you know, two of our main responsibilities are road safety and the laws that are applicable to impaired driving or the presence of THC. So it's not a level of THC, as you're aware, it's the presence of THC. And then the possession of illicit drugs as it stands under the Misuse of Drugs Act. They're the areas we're concerned about. The increase in THC is something that we have just observed as a police force that has continued to increase, particularly when we might execute a search warrant on a person's house and look at the products that they have within them. But again, we're very careful not to give any evidence on medical research or medical decisions in relation to the effects or otherwise of THC.
Okay, which leads me to this question here, an increase in products that consist of dried flowering tops of cannabis plants, which of course is the bud, which can be sold in 15-gram bottles there. Now, there was a report here, someone mentioned that there was a Fremantle case whereby the legally prescribed cannabis flower was supplied from interstate. It was intercepted and the person was, I'm not sure, arrested, but later described as being legitimate and dispensed medicine. Can you tell me more about that? Do you have any information about that particular case?
I don't have any more details about that specific case. One of my colleagues may, but I think that's where I was answering previously, Chair, and that is it is not immediately clear to police when we have identified an illicit substance which is not prescribed to someone who has either imported it legally or illegally. There is not an element of clarity for police at this time to know which decision to make. Now, police are very clear in our approach to law enforcement. We do not want to go around arresting people who have prescribed drugs doing the right thing by the community. That is absolutely not our role, but sometimes it becomes unclear about where the prescription came from, the evidence of the prescription, or if they've imported the drugs from either the east coast of Australia or many cases internationally. The Australian Border Force intercept many CBD oil containers, also cannabis, in bulk. And again, it's that lack of clarity that law enforcement, I think, across Australia currently have about the identification of which one is okay and which one isn't.
What would make it easier for you? Generally, with the prescription, you'd have actually the prescription itself would be labelled on the bottle itself. But I know that patients come to me and often the bottle is dirty, the label is old, they may put new bud into an old one there, so illicit. Is that the kind of problem you're looking at?
When we're dealing with prescription medicines, any prescription medicines, the best thing is a current bottle and very clear, identifiable drugs. We can generally end our investigations into prescription drugs very quickly when we have a clear bottle with a prescription and a very clear, highly mass-produced tablet and or drug that makes it very easy to identify the person, the prescription and the drug. I don't believe this allows our police officers to make that informed decision quick enough, which may cause members of the community to become part of the justice system unnecessarily, at least in a particular process of investigation, and it may not be warranted.
Yes. Now, you state that WAPO recommend no changes to road traffic laws in regards to medicinal cannabis at this time. Can you briefly explain why?
We just want to make sure the roads are safe. So where we are now, there is clear alcohol laws, there are clear drug laws, and our job is to make the road as safe as possible. So we would be cautious to make any agreement to any change because we're trying to make it as safe as we can. Now, if there was clear research, medical evidence, scientific evidence, and the Parliament agreed, then we would, of course, enforce those laws. But that's not, I don't think, a position police would want to take until all of that existed.
Someone who showed a presence of THC, my understanding is, and I'm not a scientist, is that it's much harder to determine if the level is medicinal or from illicit drugs. Could I take it then that someone then who tests positive for THC could say, oh, I use medicinal cannabis and here's my prescription, and that same process would go through?
Yeah, thank you. That is similar to my answer earlier about the clarity for police can prove very challenging. The difference between pharmaceutical medicine and methamphetamine is night and day, but given they're almost identical products, it's very difficult to tell the difference.
Now, it strikes me that what you're looking for here is safety on the roads.
Yes.
You're looking for impairment, and very admirably too. So your opposition to the change in the drug laws should be that there's no remote possibility of impairment. That's sort of the implication of your submission. So that would imply also that drink driving limit should be 0.
Well, again, the police don't set the levels. Obviously, we provide advice. The laws set by Parliament tell us which ones to enforce. We will always enforce the laws as they are set, but certainly we also have the option available to us to prosecute people for impaired driving, even if they are under 0.05. And as we know, smaller framed people don't carry a lot of body fat, can often be under 0.05, but be, again, impaired to drive, and police can take action in that instance.
What's the situation now with the police assessment of testing positive for THC on medicinal cannabis?
In that case, we enforce the law, and it says if the presence of THC exists, then we proceed with the charge.
And this is an opinion, not based on fact, but would you think that, as you currently see that, knowing the knowledge that you do have, is that a fair and reasonable thing to do for the population, or should we reconsider that law?
Certainly, police aren't qualified to make that judgment, in my view, given, again, we're not medical practitioners. We do know that THC, we have felt the effects of that when we deal with the general public, but certainly we are not qualified to make an assessment of the impairment or otherwise of THC. However, it's important that we enforce the laws as they are set by Parliament, and that is what we are doing. What the impairment or otherwise of THC is something that is not a position we can give on at what levels. And I think that's medical research and comprehensive medical advice that, again, the police are not in a position to say. Now, as far as what testing tools are available, we've never had to explore that because the current laws say that the presence of THC, you cannot be driving.
Because, sorry, if the committee is inclined to make a recommendation to government about, changing the arrangements here to go towards an impairment-based test of some kind, it would be useful for us to have some indication from police now as to how practical that would be for your everyday policing operations in terms of, is there products on the market for police to be able to move towards such a scheme? Let's put cost aside, because that's obviously also a decision as well that would have to become into it. But, it's all well and good for a committee like us to make such a recommendation, but what's the practical reality of it for you?
And just so I hopefully my answers were clear to the committee. The impairment test for WA Police should always remain, regardless of drug type or reason for impairment. The test of the illicit drug in what quantity, again, is something I don't believe that we are in a position to provide accurate information on, because we don't have the sufficient medical backing of police officers or policy officers within the police to say what is or isn't causing impairment. And I guess that's very similar to alcohol, that a policy setting was made about 0.5, in some states 0.8, or the US 0.8. Those things are always up for argument. That's certainly not a position we would take. We would just reinforce road safety has to be our priority, and that's why we asked for the retaining of the impairment test.
One of the stumbling blocks we've come across is that there's a discrimination between the determination of the presence of a substance. Now, we can't call it illicit, because if it's prescribed legally, it's no longer illicit, but the presence of the substance and the presence of impairment. And so one of the things that really comes across from your testimony is that we need to look more closely at how do you measure impairment to the point where a court would accept that as legal testimony.
Again, to be very clear from police, we have no intention of putting people going about their daily lives with prescription medicine, whatever it may be, in any way, shape or form in the presence of police or through an investigative process. We're always seeking clarity to make sure we can distinguish those doing the right thing and those doing the wrong thing. Many of these drugs, as we know, are on the illicit market. They are, particularly cannabis, is freely available and can significantly impair drivers and cause serious health effects to them. We just want to be able to make sure that we can clearly tell the difference amongst our 8,000 police officers on the street.
You raise a question here, an increasing trend towards cultivation of plants for personal medical use to overcome the cost of prescription cannabis. Do you come across much of that?
The importation of cannabis and cannabis products is prevalent, is significant, not through any prescription or anything else, just through the mail and parcels, because of the price being far cheaper than anything else. That has continued to increase, and in fact, we track that. We work with the ABF to track the locations of those importations through the postal mail when they detect them, and it is quite prevalent across Australia that many people are importing, particularly CBD oil primarily, but many other cannabis products. So there is a black market, if you will, of those imports.
Is there any lawful way for people to go onto the internet, not the dark net or just the internet, go to US and see a US product, buy it, and are they then committing a crime by importing it into Australia?
So that is an illegal process. There has to be a medical practitioner involved for the prescription of any drugs, obviously, in Western Australia. You cannot import cannabis and give it to yourself.
as a Western Australia Police Force, would you have any recommendations for our consideration, thoughts for our digestion, anything that would benefit our committee in coming to a conclusion?
I'll maintain, obviously, public safety, road safety remains our priority. And the best thing that we could do as a police force is to have laws that give absolute clarity to those officers to ensure we target the people committing crimes and we leave the people living their life, doing the right thing alone. So it's that clarity between those two. And that is a very difficult area in the drug space, which we understand. That's why we have a great parliament and medical experts and medical research, and we will rely on the laws that come our way to enforce them. But we do need that clarity as police, because that is a big risk for us, is that we end up doing a large investigation on people that shouldn't even be interacting with police.